Wonderful. Great to see you all. Been here all morning together. My name is Nathan Jennings. I teach at the Army's Staff College. And so today I want to talk about the idea of operational penetration as a battle-winning approach. And the idea idea for the study came to me based upon some moves the Army's been making on reorganizing our divisions. There's a plan now to make the divisions more capable of doing large-scale combat operations, so big war. And a lot of this is back to the future. So if you look at what the Army's doing, it's making the divisions look a little bit more like they did in the 1980s, 1990s. So if you look at the way we're built now, the brigade combat team owns most of the combined arms integration and capability. Fires, engineers, cavalry, recon, it's all down in the brigades. They're going to take a lot of that away, move it back up to the division level and aggregate it. So you have division fires, you'll have division cavalry, division bridging, engineers. And the idea is that the division becomes, the division commander has more ability to shape the battlefield, and the brigades will have a little bit less. So it's a different approach, and of course there's dramatic consequences for how the division and then even corps and field armies will fight based upon that alignment. So long way of getting to the idea of operational penetration. One of the new models called the penetration division. It's going to migrate to a different name, but the idea is they're making a couple of the armor divisions exquisitely capable of doing deep maneuver, all kinds of maneuver. And what they're doing is they're pulling their cavalry up to the division level so it can do more aggressive reconnaissance. They're going to take the fires away from the brigade and create a division artillery brigade, which reports to the division commander so he can mass fires in front of the division. And then also they're basically taking a ton of the tactical bridging systems from across the Army and going to pull them in these divisions. Because right now, the dirty secret, we don't have enough bridges for all the divisions to say do an aggressive advance across Europe. So the idea is we can make these, at least for now, these fewer divisions more capability. And so I was looking at the idea of the task of operational penetration, what's required to do it, why would you execute that form of maneuver? And then you could pull back, there's a little bit of actual kind of theory of tactical victory surrounding it, the physics of it, systems approach. And then that led me to look at the Battle of France, German invasion, Sedan, as an ideal case study, the most dramatic case study, perhaps. You can actually look a lot of places here. We could look at Napoleon, the difference between Austerlitz and Waterloo. Both he launches center attacks. One is very successful, one isn't. And when you start pulling back, there's a series of factors that can, in part, explain success and what I consider the most challenging form of maneuver, okay? So moving forward, as we look at the idea of it, so it's a rapid deep penetration, narrow access to neutralize or isolate a critical enemy element, or in the best case, catalyze systemic collapse from the rear to the front. So this is a way to not do a broad frontal attack that is very expensive. And there's also other options that are similar, right? And that would be flank envelopment, which also seek to avoid frontal attrition. But a little bit different why behind that, right? So for a flank attack, and I'm talking at the operational level here, this is not tactical actions. This is battle-winning events. Flank attack hit an opposing formation on its flank, hopefully to force it to fight in a way it does not want to. Envelopment, even better, get around behind it, attack its rear, attack its lines of communication. So that's kind of been the graduate level move that a lot of generals in history have adopted. But penetration is a little bit harder to achieve a similar effect. If you have to penetrate the front, get to the rear area and strike something or cause something that will create a systemic effect across their formation. The formation's a living entity with parts that have to work together. And so that's what I'm fascinated by. Like, when does this work? Why does it work? When does it not work? And so I came up with a series of factors here. This is qualitative, but I'm wondering if, as a extension of this assessment, could someone like you all, someone in the quantitative statistics, could you create a menu here? You get 5 of 8 of these, you get it, you win. Are any of these essential? And similar to the brief given earlier, could some data be pulled out about what is required to pull off this most demanding form of maneuver? Okay, so the case study we could get into is the Battle of France. But first, I just want to mention this is still with us. This is recent news from a couple weeks ago. As many of you saw, the Kharkiv offensive by the Ukrainians. I'll just ask, what was the purpose behind this? What was definitely a penetration or maneuver attack?
The way it was portrayed in Britain, it was about getting that line of communication.
Okay. Getting into that river. Okay.
Yeah, that one. Or rather the roads.
The roads and railroads behind it. Yeah.
Okay. So there's some logistical aspect to this, striking what we might call critical capabilities, critical vulnerabilities. I would argue, and I pitch this to my students as an exquisite example of operational art, not because so much the battlefield effect. They only took back maybe, I think, 1 or 2% of the total territory Russia has seized from them. So it didn't cause the Russian order battle to collapse across the theater. But remember, operational art connects tactical actions to strategic ends. The primary strategic end for them is actually to get more stuff from Western benefactors. This was the narrative played in brilliant, right? That matters in war. To show they can have that the return on investment from the Western democracies. And so it's brilliant. And that's my opinion, what they're really after.
American Revolution, right? That's a
big part of it, right? But still, the form of maneuver was penetration, relatively deep. And yes, it did collapse the Russian line in that sector back to the next river barrier. So good on them. So just showing this can still be at play. It can still work on. This is somewhere between a tactical operational level move here. Definitely not on the scale of what the Germans did in 1940, which is epic. And then you can find variations in between. Another study I look at is 1973. The Israeli counteroffensive across the canal is also a penetration attack that doesn't so much collapse the entire Egyptian line, but isolates major portions of the 3rd and 2nd Field Armies to win the war, at least militarily. All right, so that's a contemporary example. But let's get into 1940. So you guys know that's the war where Germany totally defeats France. And what we have to understand is the context. If World War II ends in July of 1940, we look at this as the greatest campaign of all time. And we appreciate the context of World War I, where what the Germans do stuns the entire world, because this is the background. This is what World War I, attrition, static positional warfare, the absence of movement and maneuver. That's how everyone sees war. And much like Napoleon perhaps did in the beginning of the 19th century, the Germans will do here. And so this is just a diagram of how everyone's envisioning war in the interwar period. No man's land, sequenced trench belts, counterattacks. And so gaining any ground is extraordinarily expensive. And the German invasion of France will turn this on its head. I'll show you the data on casualties at the end, where for right now we would call 150,000 casualties extreme. At that time, it's considered light in the context of World War I because you didn't lose 8 million. Okay, so this is the background. This is the problem that Germany has to solve. This is what, by the way, Blitzkrieg, which we kind of retrospectively call it, that's what Blitzkrieg is, a solution to the problem of trench warfare. And yes, every senior leader from Germany in World War II is a veteran. You know, they were lieutenants, captains in World War I. So that is their paradigm experience. And they're trying, you know, I've heard it said every senior leader in World War II is trying to escape the trenches. Everything they do, it's in the back of their mind. When Eisenhower is paranoid, the broad front offensive will stall. He's thinking about the solve, right? He's thinking about, oh my God, this could turn into that. And so they're all doing this calculus continuously. It's in the back of their mind. All right, and so France's answer to World War I is to double down. It worked then, we won. Let's build the greatest trench system of all time. It's called the Maginot Line. Probably, you know, the largest single investment in defensive architecture. And so that's there in the south, you'll see. And then in the north, you have some forest areas, too hard to pass through. And then we have the core movement corridors through Belgium. And that's where they think the war will happen. By the way, just like happened in the Schlieffen Plan, 1914, the opening moves, where that's where the German army came through. So France's war plan is pretty simple. Defend here, block here, and then move your best field armies north and fight the war in Belgium. That's, by the way, a good sell to the French people to fight the war in Belgium and not France again. And so that's the idea. And then somewhere in Belgium, defensive line, it'll bog down into another attritional fight, which favors France and its allies with global resources. And so this is the French plan, and it actually makes some sense. And yes, they have one of the best armies in the world at this time, one of the largest tank forces. So it's, you know, it's easy to criticize them now, but most of us would have been in that camp at that time. That's kind of the normal science approach of this is how you do war. The Germans, on the other hand, are in a position where they don't have the luxury of fighting another World War I. They know what happens in a global attritional contest. They've seen the movie before. And so they're starting to look for answers. And of course, they have a policymaker for all of his faults who is accepting of new ideas. And they have agents of change like Heinz Guderian. He's not the only one. He's not even the most important one, by the way, but he's the most famous, perhaps, who are bringing new ideas. And you know, they're looking at some of the British theorists, little Hart, guys like that, Fuller, on what is the potential of mechanized combined arms warfare? What's the potential of joint warfare to restore movement to the battlefield to win quickly? Right? They're associating deep movement with decisive outcomes. Part of this is development of the tanks. They don't even have the best tanks at the time, but of course, it's all on how they plan to use it. We see what. Okay, so as part of this, they're developing a few ideas that will go through some of the factors, but it's the combined arms mechanized team. They're the only army in the world. They're the only army in the world at scale or really developing out the idea of, I'm going to take the entire division and mount it on track or wheels so it can all move together. This does necessitate limitations on how much artillery you can bring. Remember, the normal approach at the time is I need massive artillery controlled and grouped at corps and field army level. You can't do that with a mounted division that's moving that fast. So what's the offset? Close air support. So their air force is optimized, has bomber capability, but it's optimized to support a ground campaign. And so those are some of the asymmetric advantages they will introduce, and at least in the first few campaigns have an enormous payoff. Of course, challenge and response, other armies will learn, co-opt, and do it better. All right, so testing out the concept, invasion of Poland, 1939. This is a test run. Right now, the Panzers are really only at the division level. They haven't really built out the core Panzer groups yet, but they're testing it out. And what this is going to do is show the potential. And because the German army maintains their general staff that is actually a critical learning organization, they're going to take these lessons and make themselves better. You know, of course, these are not moral assessments. It's purely about tactical and operational efficiency, and they get it done. And it shows the value of what some of these combined arms team can do if everyone is mounted and can move together. I forgot to mention the other novelty. Let's put a two-way radio in every fighting vehicle, right? Many of the French platoons, the lieutenant's tank is the only one with a radio, and it's a one-way receiver. So that can tell you how they view kind of mission command and control. Just do what I say, and if you're doing a methodical battle approach, where everything is just sequenced and planned, I just need to tell this lieutenant when to counterattack during the sequence of the ever large, right? That's the World War I approach. Hold back massive reserves, pile them in as appropriate, and eventually stop the breakthrough and then restore the line. That's not going to work here when Germany invades. All right, and that brings us to the main event. So May 1940, Germany goes to war against France. This is part of a larger scheme for Eastern European dominance. You have to deal with secure your, from Germany's perspective, their west flank. And so through a sequence of kind of really unpredictable events, they land on this war plan where instead of going through Belgium, a repeat of the Schlieffen plan, they're going to penetrate in the center. Okay? Not through the Maginot Line, but just north of it, across the forests that the Ardennes forests that are seemingly impassable. They think they can get through, and that's the weak point. The French don't expect it to happen there. Their best divisions are not down there because they have terrain in front of them that supports defense. And then, of course, the Maginot Line they think would be foolhardy to attack, and probably so. So the Germans going to read this playbook and use it against them. And the idea is, let the French. They're going to have a basically both a deception and fixing fork army group attack into Holland, into Belgium, and that's the bait. The Allied army, a couple French field armies, and the BEF will respond perfectly, and they will move up there to block, to establish those World War I conditions, and then let the British Army mobilize. I'm sorry, the British Empire mobilize, and eventually they know they'll overwhelm Germany. Round two. And so they move up there, and part of their talk from back there, they move up into here. These are these blue field armies here, and the Germans read it perfectly. They somehow escape notice, even though French spotters aircraft actually see the German armor massing here in the forest. They don't bomb it. They don't. The reports are sent up. It's not fully integrated, and again, the French play the hand the Germans want them to play. And so you end up with a penetration here. We'll talk a little bit more about the gap cross in detail, but initially they get across the river and then they don't stop. And the key point is not stopping. Under any rules of war, Panzer Group Kleist should stop here and consolidate. Even if you get across the river, that's a miracle. They do it in about 1/4 of the time the French predict is possible. And they don't wait for the big gun trains to show up, right? I got to drag up all my cannon to be able to do the attritional World War I fight. Instead, they just keep going. And they get inside the French decision cycle, and the French will never catch up. Meanwhile, let's not forget, there's actually an army group attacking in the north that is also in the fight. They're not just a deception force. There's a major tank battle up there. And so these best field armies of the Allies are on the horns of dilemma. Do I continue to engage north? We hear rumors of something happening behind us. There's a collapse of the German reserve system that is supposed to attack. Right, Goodall and some of these guys, they will try counterattacks, but ultimately fail.
You mean French, right?
French, sorry. Yeah. Thank you. And so here's Guderian's crossing at the Meuse. So that's the traffic jam behind him. Looks like a pretty good target. This is the crossing, another great target. Only one of his division crossings succeeds initially. This is a near run thing. very close. In fact, Mission Command, they send over infantry first in boats. One of the heroic infantry sergeants, he gets over to another division's lane, takes out some of the guns and opens the way for that division to get across. So some really interesting tactical case studies here of sergeants actually having operational level impact with their decisions. Of note, massive use of close air support right in front of the crossing. The biggest, the largest airstrike concentration in the history of warfare at this moment. And that's what's really paving the way. Yeah.
Can you describe the composition of the actual forces they used to do the wet gap crossing?
So the lead is it's infantry and rubber boats. By the way, same as the Israelis in '73. And then they start bringing. I have to go back to my study on the exact bridging systems they use. Yeah.
But clearly, they prepared for it.
Yeah.
It was the infantry battalions of the Panzer divisions.
That's right. They attach an elite infantry regiment to the corps. Because remember, the rest of the infantry in the corps in the East Division are motorized. They're on wheels. They're moving with the tanks. But this infantry, they're task organized to do this.
Do you know if they rehearsed this?
Yes.
They rehearsed all of it in
They've
detail.
done a major rehearsal in February on the River Meuse, which is not very far, but they even down to the point of using. Sorry, I'm just giving you.
No, go ahead.
Even to the point of referring to the previous operational in this one.
Yeah, even they up in the north, Evan Miel, probably the most impressive fortification in the world. They built a fake one in Germany, and war game on it. So again, this is the German General Staff, probably the best thinking staff in the world at this time, and that's the product.
By way of contrast, Liddell Hart there reported that at one point he suggested to a couple of senior French commanders that they cut down some trees to slow the armor advance through the forest. And one of the commanders said, no, we don't want to do that. That'll stop our cavalry counterattack.
Yeah. All right. So continuing with the campaign here, the breakout works, and Guderian, Rommel, those guys, best known names, they keep going. They keep going even when they're told to stop. And essentially, you have Army Group B in the north, Army Group A there, and you end up with the Dunkirk disaster. Hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers captured, pinned in. Some do escape via the boat extraction. And the key thing is some of the psychological aspects. You can imagine these German commanders as they reach Cambrai, Abbeville, the Somme, right? They've been there before, and they're taking it in a matter of hours. The French Prime Minister, before they even get to this point, he calls Churchill, "We've been beaten." And they haven't even been beaten yet. So some of this is the psychological aspect, the moral aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. But I forget his name, but now when you close Churchill,
Chamberlain.
and Churchill.
Oh,
Churchill wasn't PM yet. Churchill became PM as a result of this.
No, not quite. Sorry, Churchill becomes PM on the 10th. Okay, and we're talking now the 12th.
yeah, he calls Churchill.
Yeah, right during this period.
Yeah.
The government fell immediately.
The government fell as a result of the Norway campaign, but it happens to be about 2 days after the Germans start moving with the Ardennes. So just before this. Yeah. Sorry.
So real quick, more concerns about outrunning our supply lines?
Tons of concerns. So, and that's some of the items we'll get to, sustainment.
Yeah.
They do a sustainment package that no mechanized corps in the world could do today, which is Panzer Group Kleist carries nearly everything it needs with it. It's optimized with 3 additional motor transports, transportation battalions and brigades, tons of fuel, and they're able to go the distance without a major operational pause. And I'll just reiterate, no army in the world could do that today, what Panzer Group Kleist did.
And they war gamed, and how did they develop the tactics? War gaming or?
War game. All they can do is, you have Poland as the test case,
Yeah.
right? And then they expand that out through war games. They, through some lucky events, they're given more time. Hitler wants to go early, and they're forced to wait till the next summer. And you know, this is by the way a product of after World War I, limited to a small army, a very small officer corps. Who do you keep? Only graduates of the General Staff College.
Yeah.
That's so they have a very intelligent officer corps. You know, as the core of the army they build out for World War II.
So then the guy who learned that you could outrun your supply lines and live in 1940 proceeded to do it and wipe out his force in 1942.
Sure. So at this time, though, so this is extremely successful. The best armies in France and Europe and England cornered there. Most of the French are captured. Some get away. Some British get away. The Dunkirk miracle. That's nice to talk about. This is an epic defeat. It's just that.
The bits who do get back to England, the vast majority had their rifles. They
Yeah.
had nothing else.
Nothing else.
Literally nothing else.
Yeah, I guess
Churchill,
the
after his great speech, never before was so much
No.
by
Yeah.
so many and so few. The next thing he said was, "Wars are not won by evacuations."
the silver lining
This
is
is a disaster.
when they re-equip, it'll be with more modern equipment.
American tanks.
The other silver lining is that they managed to keep 600,000 men used.
Sure.
So at the end of this, I'll tell you a funny little story about what happens on the evacuation. But that,
Okay. So what I also find fascinating is not just the fact that they can win this first phase of the campaign. They pivot essentially 3 army groups south, reorganize, and they do it again.
Mhm.
The French set up successive river belt defensive lines, hedgehog defensive formations. Turns out to be exactly the wrong thing to do because guys like Rommel go around the defensive strong points. But the same thing happens. You have Rommel and Guderian now. I know. I think Rommel's a corps commander now. If I'm not.
No, he's still
Is he not?
division.
Guderian's promoted.
Yeah.
Guderian's promoted, but they're both leading penetrations, and that collapses once they get through in their respective penetrations. The whole French line collapses to the next river belt. They do it again a couple times, and then it's over. So again, using penetration to avoid a long frontal engagement across the entire, attrition across the entire front, collapse the enemy line. It's the least expensive way to win decisive. Especially when a campaign like the World Wars, where there's no flank to envelop, right? We're talking about continental fronts, similar to perhaps what we see in Ukraine. All right, so they win, theater pursuit, and then consolidate the strategic gains. All right, so that's kind of the case study, and the history is the history. I'm more interested in the why, the how, what made this form of maneuver so successful at a time when it's not like in World War I. It's not as if no one thought of this. They try this numerous times in World War I, and it just doesn't work. They make it work a generation later. That's kind of the point of my brief. So
It's a bit different with their superiority in combined
Yep.
arms, isn't it?
Yep.
that's our list.
Bringing in those offsets. So here's just some of the outcome comparison, just for Germany to win decisively in a few weeks at a cost of 157,000 casualties versus more than 7 million. That's what this operational penetration earned. To defeat the enemy, same thing. I don't have to kill 6 million Frenchmen or kill and wound them, right? Only 360,000. I say only, but right, it's relative. And so that's the point. This is a defeat approach. I don't want to say defeat mechanism. That will, it allows you to win decisively at less expensive cost, and by the way, is very attractive to policymakers.
I think I'm right in saying that if you just take the Western Front and you just take killed, and it's within those numbers, German dead in World War I in France, about a million.
Yeah.
And I do happen to know that of the 157,000 German there, dead is 44,000. So that's a
100 million to 44,000.
yeah, and that's a gearing of what, about 25 to 1,
Yeah.
but they win that time.
Yeah.
You're smack on the nail.
Okay, so the whole point here now, explain the impossible. We put ourselves in the shoes of, Marshall, Eisenhower over in the U.S. They're saying what just happened. We need to learn this. The whole world is in shock. So what just happened? And so one of it is just a broader question of operational art across the tactical, operational, strategic levels. The Germans align what needs to happen. They need a quick victory in a single front war. We have to do this quickly before it could develop. What if Russia flips on you? What if Germany or the US and UK mobilize, right? They've seen that movie before. And so they have to avoid that strategically, which means I need to win quickly and decisively. Operations, so they developed what will later be called the Blitzkrieg concept, this deep mechanized attack using coordinated air support. And that's the operational approach that will facilitate that strategic end. And then tactics, they build a war machine that can do it. Remember, most of the German army looks like German army of World War I. Guys walking, cavalry on horses. It's maybe 10, 15%, which is mechanized and motorized. That's the spearhead, and it turns out to be just enough to get it done. Of course, it's not done perfectly. There's delays. One of the Panzer Corps in particular is late getting across. But it's, in war, you just have to be better than the other side. And that's really what plays out. Okay, so major takeaway, a great example of operational art at play, the strategy, the operational approach, and the tactics all in alignment. Right? MILDEC, military deception, a huge part of this. And so we could ask, it's a fair question. Does every successful penetration attack against a prepared major army, does it require deception? I've looked, I can't really find an example where deception wasn't at play. Right? Because if you don't deceive the enemy into either thinning out the middle area or not committing reserves immediately to that area, I'm not sure it can happen. I know here the deception is expert. They get not just a few guys, they get the 3 best field armies in the theater to move to where they want them. And it's perfect because that was the plan, I guess, until months prior. Manstein.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is great. I think I want to say this is universal, but we'd have to do a systematic, study to really, outside of examples where it's just brute force, where it really doesn't matter what you do, you can steamroll the enemy. Okay. Asymmetric advantage we mentioned, dedicated air interdiction. There's interviews with French soldiers after the war saying this is what unhinged them. Getting hit with the Stuka, this new intensity of airstrikes, and then the Panzers show up. So without this, probably the Panzers get slowed down at some point and stop. There's examples of numerous counterattacks by the French. They're in their assembly area, they're getting ready to go, and then these guys show up and pound them. Imagine doing a counterattack after you've been degraded from the get-go. Then the Panzers show up before you thought possible. Legendary story of, I think it's Rommel, driving up, finds a whole French division on the road, taking a nap, their steps in, and they just drive down the road and start shooting everything to the left and right. No one can imagine that kind of movement.
You're absolutely right. I think the French are actually
Refueling?
not least
Yeah.
because their tanks have incredibly short range.
Yeah.
But no, you're quite right.
All right, so that's one aspect. And by the way, this is one of the origin stories of joint warfare. It's probably not a stretch to say the Germans invent joint joint ground warfare as we know it today in this campaign. And then, of course, in Barbarossa, even though it fails in the initial phase, they will really get closer towards real-time air-ground integration. Here, I think it's mostly pre-planned integration, but still, the effect is supreme.
The British and the French have enough air power that if it's known to do it, they could have interdicted.
Well, when the crossing has happened at Sedan, they send in a massive air force to contest, to bomb, and first, Guderian brings a whole bunch of air defense artillery, and it's extremely effective. And then the counter attack, the Luftwaffe is in the air fighting, and basically they win. And so from what I can see, UK goes into systems kind of shock after that. We got to save the RAF, and then the French are already kind of segregated or sprout over the entire front. They haven't massed their air force, so it's harder to respond concentrated. So yeah, the Germans win the initial air fight decisively.
It's actually worse than that. And I'm very surprised on this. The Royal Air Force actually found the Germans moving through the Ardennes about 3 days earlier. And they reported up, and the reporting chain was strange, but they reported effectively to what we now say a French KO. And the French said, "You are not to bomb them." So they were ordered not to bomb them. If they bombed them 3 days earlier, you would have said this would be very, very different. Give them 3 days, allow them to get their air defense over the bridges. We lost horrible losses trying to attack those bridges.
So I'm
Do
going
you
to
have any information about why that order not to bomb was given?
Yeah, I can't remember what it said, but there is I can find you the reference, but yeah, but basically the French said, no, something like this is not a priority.
Let's save that so we can.
I'm coming short on time. I've actually mismanaged my own brief here. I don't want to overstep my colleague, steal his thunder. So I'm just going to, other advantages. Like I said, the Combined Arms Panzer Division, if you go to Fort Hood right now and look at the 1st Cavalry Division, it's basically this, a variation. They invent the modern Combined Arms Heavy Division. Every army in the world, CSEN, has looked at this. Okay, we're going to make it a little different, but it's the same principle of putting everything on wheels and tracks and moves together in all arms fight. And so this is a decisive advantage over the French. Radio synchronized seems like common sense to us now. They're the first to do it. And this is especially important for deep maneuver. This is the problem in World War I. I get my forces deep, I lose contact, I don't know where they're at, I don't know who to reinforce, what do I wait, where do I bring supplies? This will allow that combined arms integration, sequencing, the things we do, we consider just, par for the course in warfare now. Sustainment package, I mentioned they soup up Panzer Group Kleist with 3 additional motor transport packages. And according to some historians, basically the Panzer Group is able to negotiate every logistical problem all the way to the Channel with what it brought with it, through the forest. Put another way, if you're trying to achieve a deep penetration, especially maybe even a continental penetration, if you have to reach back to your national support area, you're in trouble. It will almost assuredly will cause culmination at some point. And of course, in this idea where you created these long exposed flanks for your penetration, culmination probably means catastrophic defeat once the enemy begins to counterattack. Okay, gap crossing. Again, this is obviously the result of detailed wargaming, but a combined arms approach, getting the right assets across once you get the bridge first. And of course, we know Guderian was smart enough to prioritize ADA, not just tanks. Senior leadership. This is something I've discussed with senior army leaders about. We're all coming out of the Coin era where you're back at, the 2-star, 3 stars back has to be back at the FOB with a giant operations center with numerous screens, because that's the only way to command and control, much like the Chateau General of World War I. If you're forward at the front, you're really only commanding the battalion in front of you. So In this example, though, these guys are forward. They're at the point of friction making decisions because the decision cycle is so tight, and to stay inside the enemy decision cycle, you can't allow for the time lag of going back through the echelons and finding you, then sending it back. Guderian is forward, so is Rommel. And so that's one of the things I wonder today. If we're going to do something similar, do modern commanders have to get in the habit of accepting that risk again? And yes, that means 2-star generals will die on the battlefield.
Have you looked at the way the differences between the American staff practice and the German staff practice, where the chief of staff had command authority?
Yeah, I talk about it in class a lot, the general staff model versus the commander-centric model. That would be a big assist to have that staff officer empowered, right? And let the commander go with the TAC maybe a little bit more. And then, by the way, and today we get thrown EDUG, electronic warfare degraded environment, where that 2-star general will not be in a helicopter forward. So you're going to be on the ground in a small group of armored vehicles, some kind of vehicles. And then you may not be able to talk all the time, maybe episodic talking, things like that. So again, probably more requirement to be forward with your lead brigade battalions at certain points, not all the time. So, but I know they had to do it there, and that was a part of their success.
The Russians reportedly lost about a dozen generals in
Ukraine. Yeah, so that's partly their own approach, right? I think actual brigadiers down some commanding. Maybe they don't trust their NCOs, they need that. But the same thing, some of this is happening at gap crossing for them. They have generals forward to adjudicate and make it happen. And then they die because they're in artillery range. Decision cycle warfare. So this is part of it. Once they cross the Sedan, they get inside the French command's decision cycle, and the French never catch up. And the point here is the penetration can't stop. It can't stop for any reason, whether it's logistical, enemy interference, mud. If it stops, you're giving the enemy time to reset themselves. And by definition, they should have superior counterattack forces if you're doing the penetration right. So that just means you have to identify how far do I need to get, and you can't stop till you get there, or you're at danger of kind of giving up that decision cycle superiority. Okay, part of this goes back to that command system. The German system is more responsive at this time. Yeah,
I think that obviously right the decision cycle. However, I think that the tool that they needed to be able to do this was a very, very educated officer forward, and also NCO corps, which was tactical, very, very confident.
yeah,
And they were, because of this, they were able to do good enough decisions,
yeah.
and also keep up the momentum. They were ahead of the French in some hours, repeatedly.
Yeah, and we're talking about minutes and hours sometimes
Yeah,
being the difference,
exactly.
right?
But I think you need to look at the whole education system to be able to actually.
And this goes back to that German general staff. It's academy. It's PME pipeline. I mean, I think you go back to late 19th century U.S. Army dress uniforms. What do they look like? Got spiky helmets. After the Franco-Prussian War, everyone is copying that. So and they still are benefiting from that expertise. By the way, which is wargaming. Right? We've talked about asking the question: do the Prussians invent modern wargaming the way we know it? And the answer may be yes.
There's an anecdote about some Prussians talking to some Austrians. The Austrians didn't understand what the Prussians were doing. And when they explained it, the Austrians said, well, basically what we translate as, how do you make money out of this? How do you gamble on this? And they didn't understand it. It was basically a pyramid.
Yeah.
They couldn't see the point of doing it if you couldn't make money out of it.
Sure. This is one of the final factors, COG analysis. Of course, center of gravity. You can, a lot of opinions on whether this works. What does classes mean by it? But if we just look at it as a kind of operational level targeting mechanism, the French get it right? The entire point of the penetration is not to take Paris, which is considered one of the things that might happen. It's not to turn south and outflank the Maginot Line, which is because that's the largest investment. That would be a common sense thing to do as well. They intend pivot north and isolating what they correctly identify as the center of gravity of the Allied kind of larger military construct. It's these 3 field armies. If I beat them, then I can beat the rest. And actually, I don't have to initially annihilate them. The real thing, even as they're taking pressure from the north, it's really the cutting of their locks. Remember, take any armored corps, we take 3 corps at Fort Hood. I don't have to kill 3 corps. I kill its fuel dumps and its lines of communication. In a few weeks, it's an infantry corps, right? These guys know that. And so this is a great example, I think, of COG analysis, probably at the operational level, on what is the enemy center of gravity of that target that allows me to win quickly and decisively. Right, and then as a contrast, we're closing out here. Here's a very similar operational penetration, just 4 years later, that doesn't work, okay? We could go down this list of things. Get back up here. And we can look at, and the Germans violate most of these in that campaign. They don't have asymmetry. Everyone's gone to school on mechanized warfare right now. They don't have air superiority. COG analysis is questionable. Is it getting up to Antwerp? Is that really going to do the job? Deception. Some, but not enough. Leadership, attrition, mobility. Is a plan great if you're relying on capturing enemy fuel dumps to continue your plan? That's pretty risky. So tying into sustainment. Asymmetries. They know they're outclassed in the air power game. Okay, I have some cloud cover now. What happens when the clouds leave? A couple days into that offensive, U.S. Army Air Corps shows up and delivers a shellacking. So this is a great example where they try it again later, and without those offsets, right, without the asymmetric advantages, which they had at the beginning, everyone's using radios in their vehicles now. Everyone has, I mean, look at the U.S. armor divisions, combined arms, mounted teams, all arms. So a lot of the offsets that allowed them to achieve this decisive penetration in 1940 are absent here. The result, they create these flanks, and then they're attacked on the flanks and rolled up, and it basically destroys the last offensive capability of this army.
All that is true, but you're being a bit unkind to yourself. In this example, you have the US Army to the south that can attack the north. There's nothing the French have, no, to do that.
Sure.
Due to better planning.
Sure.
The other thing the Americans had as an advantage here was they figured out the fuel dump was a major objective. That's the thing to defend.
Yeah.
Even if it involved blowing up the fuel dump, don't let them take it.
And but the larger point is, it looks like to me, if you're going to do this kind of risky, high reward, high risk operational penetration, you need some offsets. You have to have some asymmetries that will allow you to maintain the tempo and achieve the depth. The Germans don't have it here. The Israelis do in 1973, after some hard won trial and error, right? They figure it out and they get across the canal. Napoleon has it in 1806, 1805 at Austerlitz. Alexander the Great, don't quote me on the date, but Gaugamela. That's an example of penetrates, strikes the moral cog of the army, which is the king himself.
Would your asymmetries equate to Bob Humboldt's advantages that he quantifies in that?
Yeah, so that's where I think this can go.
At the conceptual level,
Yeah.
was at the mathematical, but they sound similar.
I think you could start building this idea of, you could probably do it for every form of maneuver, by the way. which is the main ways to go on offense. Every foreign maneuver, you could probably build out some kind of capabilities, run down and apply data to it to pull something out of this. And, you know, of course, operational penetration or envelopment is always going to be the first thing generals want to do because it allows you to win decisively at the least expense. Finally, here's a great quote from the 1st Panzer Division. They knew their job. Force of penetration through a defensive zone considered by the French as impenetrable. That speaks to the psychological aspect. If the French knew it was penetrable, they would have built up a better defense. So this is the, again, Napoleon at Austerlitz, right? Weakening his right flank so the enemy thins out their center when they attack them on the right. Getting inside, reading the enemy, getting in their head, using it against them. All right, and that's kind of the closeout, and I'll just offer up this idea. Forms of maneuver are still relevant. If you want to win decisively, you have to go on offense. You have to take it to the enemy. And we just saw Ukraine do this after what had been a very difficult few months, losing some ground, static warfare along a 1,200-mile front, attritional. They decided we're gonna go on offense in the north, and they did a modest penetration with outsized strategic effect. And so someday we'll look at that campaign. We can maybe apply some of the same formula. Yes, they were doing Mildeck elsewhere. Even sequencing the Kherson offensive could be a form of Mildeck. Asymmetries, other aspects, we'll be able to pull that out and see how did they achieve this. But Battle of France, the most dramatic example, perhaps. Also perhaps unrealistic in this time for some reason, but still worth looking at. And that's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you.